absolutely huge landmark was crossed in sort of the development of British journalism this week. A journalistic organisation was effectively given charitable status for the first time ever, which means it will be treated favourably in terms of the tax regime. The state will offer it benefits. Now, this is a massive change in how we think of journalism in this country. And of course, rather predictably, this organisation is set up by a former Guardian and Observer journalist and has immediately moved to sort of help and favour publications which are divisive, as you might imagine. They've given support and help to a magazine called Galdem, which only publishes non-white people and non-white women and non-binary people, and another website which has been widely described as Islamist. So you know, this is actually a massive point, and it hasn't received any discussion online, and I think it's very, very worrying, because effectively what has happened is the engine of journalism previously with advertisers and readers, and journalists were forced to investigate the things that people cared about and the things that people wanted to read about, because they had to serve those readers, because they paid their bills. They either bought magazines and that was their income, or the advertisers wanted to reach as many people as possible. So the journalists were forced to go out and find stories that had mass appeal. And that was the sort of capitalist version of journalism that relied on the market. And effectively what this decision this week by the Charity Commission has done is remove that as the engine of journalism and inserted in its place sort of the paternalistic hand of the metropolitan liberal class as effectively deciding what we're all going to read and effectively what's good for us, you know, like what gets investigated and what's good for us. And I think it's incredibly concerning. Now, why are we in this state? Why are we in a position where journalism has effectively become a charity case, and that we're even discussing this? Now, that's because of the funding crisis within journalism. You could say that's because of journalists have been bad at their jobs and have failed to serve their audience, and people aren't willing to pay for it anymore. I think that's certainly the case with a lot of publications and some broadcasters. But it's also because of a structural change, a technological change, that we're all moving online and we're not buying newspapers. And effectively, as the Competition and Markets Authority revealed just a few months ago, 80+% of digital ad revenue now goes to two companies, Facebook and Google. You know, all of the money that you used to spend, society used to spend on everything from Lonely Hearts ads to job ads to, you know, commercial adverts, all used to go in newspapers, that all goes straight to Facebook and straight to Google now. And journalism is struggling to find a business model. I think this is a big problem and it should not be overlooked, and we need to find a solution to that. The Competition and Markets Authority put forward an interesting solution, which was to give away the data of Google and Facebook to get rivals, and Australia's trialling a new solution at the moment, making Google pay for links. Don't know if these are the right solutions, but anyway, there is a big problem. There's no question about that with the funding of journalism. But the solution is not to turn journalism into a charity case, which inevitably will mean that left-wing gushing liberals will effectively decide what we're all reading in journalism. So let's look at who has been given this charitable status just last week by the Competition and Markets Authority. It's an organisation called the Public Interest News Foundation. They were founded just a few months ago, within a year, by a guy called Jonathan Hayward. Well, he seems to be the boss of it at the moment. He's a former Observer journalist, which is the sister paper of the Guardian, the far left Guardian. They're getting their funding from a group called the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Joseph Rowntree Foundation has, for I think well over 100 years, funded liberal leftist causes throughout the country. They do some great work, they also do some questionable stuff, but they have a clear ideological bent. They're also supported and get some funding by an organisation called Impress. Now, Impress is the newspaper regulator which has been sanctioned by the government. It was set up, largely set up by a man called Max Mosley, who felt he was unfairly treated by the Murdoch newspapers when they exposed a story about him allegedly having a Nazi-themed orgy He's hardly a neutral arbiter in terms of the tabloids and the work that they do, and the newspapers and the media and the work that they do. But anyway, he is behind this new regulator, which 99% of newspapers refuse to sign up to, because we shouldn't have a government-backed regulator of newspapers. They should regulate themselves. The state should have nothing to do with regulating the media, that they're there to scrutinise the state. But anyway, Impress have had a hand in this, and they're pushing it and supporting it. So you've got a left-wing, big fund political group, and you've got a very controversial, what I would describe as an anti-free press organisation behind this new public interest foundation, which is funding all these publications. So what have they done? What have the Public Interest News Foundation done? So they have funded some good newspapers. I think it was the Westmoreland and Herald, or some good local newspapers have received grants and funding, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. I think local papers are really, really struggling at the moment. But the Jonathan Hayward was invited on the BBC's media show literally the day after this was all announced, and he sort of was asked quite directly by Amal Rajan, the BBC's media editor, if his organisation would also fund the Sun, the Sun newspaper, the biggest selling newspaper in the country, the most popular. People like it. And he dodged the question, wouldn't answer it. He said that, however, newspapers that were giving money, too much dividends to their share owners and things like that, wouldn't get it, and they would focus on what he called public interest journalism. Now, public interest journalism clearly exists. It's clearly a good thing. But it's a subjective thing, like a lot of value-based political things. What is in the public interest? I don't know. One man's public interest is another man's public danger. A lot of people would consider the Sun's widespread coverage of illegal immigration to be in the public interest. Ultimately, the aim is to uphold the rule of law, and some people value it. Other people think that it perpetuates hate and puts migrants in danger and creates tension in society. So one man's public interest is very, very different from another's. So when you start getting one person or one group like this new charitable organisation saying what's in the public interest, you inevitably piss off other people who don't agree with that conception of public interest. This is a deep philosophical question that I can't answer really here. It's this huge question, but that's the problem, right? And with all these sort of charitable organisations, it's the left liberal metropolitan views that inevitably seem to float to the top, right? And the more widely held, commonly held silent majority views always seem to get pushed to the bottom of the pile, except in elections when things are secret. That's a whole other question. But anyway, so he wouldn't confirm if he'd give money to the Sun. But the two ones that, well, one of them he did mention in this interview. That's this magazine called Galdem. And they basically they're set up to give a platform to what they describe as non-binary and women of colour. That's fair enough. If people want to read that, if there's a market for it, that's fair enough. And they some people would obviously call that divisive. Saying you're gonna dictating who can write according to the ethnic group might upset people, but it's clearly divisive. But they straight for that. It's clearly perceived as a left-wing publication. Now, I talk about this at length, this Gouda magazine, because actually I looked them up on Alexa because I wanted to find out, are they popular? Are people reading this, or is it just a magazine that the media class wants to celebrate? They're down in 573,000th most popular, so below 500,000 in terms of the world rankings of website. That's pretty low down. 5 Pillars, this quote-unquote Islamist website that have also received funding, are even below them. Not many people are reading these things, but you do hear about Galdem a lot. It's always on Radio 4. It's been on the BBC's media programme, the same programme that Mr Hayward was interviewed on, about 5 times in the past couple of years since I've been counting. All their writers associated with this magazine. And it gets a lot of coverage for a magazine that is not really being read. Just for comparison, the Daily Star is 6,900-ish on Alexa. The Daily Mail and Breitbart are up at about 200 to 250 ranking. 500,000th place to 200. And people clearly read certain websites a lot more than others, but these very unpopular websites are being singled out for this huge amount of support because they sort of fit fashionable causes. Now, well, Galdem certainly does, but I think 5 Pillars in my opinion, is altogether more dangerous. It was set up by a guy called Roshan Salil, who basically used to work for Press TV, which is the Iranian state broadcaster linked to a theocratic regime which beheads women and kills gays, and Dili Hussein, who is a very controversial figure in the media. He used to have a lot of platforms, but recently doesn't appear on the BBC anymore. He has allegedly been openly supporting groups like Hezbollah al-Tahrir, who are a pro-Islamist organisation. He associates with some very controversial imams who've said some very controversial things. But again, this is another fashionable cause that this charitable journalist organisation now is funding and supporting with their grants and their training and all this kind of thing. And I don't think it's something that the British public wide would support. So it's all very interesting. And again, it comes down to these sort of liberal left causes, which if we allow these liberal leftists and these charity workers to get control of the journalism industry, they're going to fund some really questionable things like potentially violent Islamists, which they've moved to do straight away. Allegedly, these groups. I must stress that people like Dili Hussein would obviously deny these things and say that he just supports his religion, and I'm sure he does do some great. He is a very talented guy. He's a very, very, very good speaker. But I would take issue with some of the things that he's sort of written about. So it's a really interesting question. What is public interest journalism? Why should we allow it to happen? Another interesting example of this in recent weeks is the Spectator, which obviously the Co-op magazine tried to sort of do a sort of cancel culture. We're going to block advertising from you. And a lot of people were saying, they're reporting on transgenderism is not in the public interest, it's harmful, it's hate. And other people have said, well, they're scrutinising the gender identity bill, they are supporting the sex-based rights of women, which were hard won. And it's there's two sides to a lot of these things, but is a charitable organisation, is one former Guardian journalist the best person to make the call on which papers on each side of these huge amount of very complicated debates, which one is going to get funding? It is really significant, because journalism drives a lot of our public discussion in this country, and ultimately a lot of our policy, of things that end up on TV, end up in Parliament, and feed into the sort of laws that we all live by. And if journalism, I must stress, there's just one group at the beginning now, but if this is a fundamental change now and we get more charitable journalism, I think that this really could change the public discussion in this country across the board. And we need to just talk about that. And no one's been talking about this. That's why I'm making this video right now. But I'll finish by saying that sort of grant funding isn't new in journalism, right? Like rich groups have always given money to journalists, okay, and the Guardian is a great example. They were set up, they haven't made a proper profit in decades. They're basically kept on a life support by a thing called the Scott Trust, which is around about £1 billion trust, which has been going for a long time. It was basically it was launched to maintain the liberal leaning outlook of this newspaper, and it gives grants to the newspaper, the Guardian, to effectively keep it alive. And you could say that people like the Barclay brothers, who do the Telegraph and the Spectator, and even lots of other people that buy up newspapers, they do it for the influence and for the social and political influence that it comes with getting involved in the media, as much as they do it for a business. So I'm not saying like all grants and all grant funding within journalism is bad. Rich people shouldn't be banned from getting involved in the media and putting their money into the media. But I am saying it's bad that the state is now taking a side. So the Charity Commission have said that certain organisations can class themselves as charities and get tax breaks, and then that level playing field, that free market where rich people, the Scott Trust on the left wing side to the Barclay brothers on the other side, are both free to put into money into journalism. Suddenly the state is taking a side, and it looks to be the case that they've chosen a left wing organisation straight away to start receiving these tax breaks. So effectively that settlement where everyone was treated equally now is pulled back. So we need to talk about this. It might be fine. There's some charitable journalistic organisations around the world, like the International Organisation of Investigative Journalists, who've done some great work over the years, and maybe this will all work out fine. But it's certainly a debate that we need to have. And I think journalism has a really bright future in this country, but it's a future I want it to have a self-sustaining future where journalists fund themselves, the brilliance of their reporting and their work is a product that we all want to buy, and the market and consumers support journalism. That's the future I want for journalism. I don't want it to be a charity case. The day that journalism becomes a charity case, it has failed. So if you liked my video, I'm going to be doing a few more of them about lots about this sort of media issue. I worked as a journalist, and I was the Brexit Party's former head of press, and I worked for Defund, the BBC, so I talk a lot about the media and stuff. So if you like my channel, please subscribe and hit the bell button as well, please, because that will give you a notification when I release new videos. So this is a really important issue. Please share it widely and get the debate going. Put a comment in the comment section, and thank you very much for watching.